Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Well, the number one practical subject Jesus talked about all the time was money. Because if we can see money the way God sees money, we will be far more inclined to do as God says to do with money. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my money manager any longer. What should I do now? My master's taking away my job. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. How much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. Sit down quickly and make it 450. The master commended the dishonest manager. So what's the imperative? Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. According to Jesus, money is a means. And the question it causes us to ask is, how can I leverage more of what I have as a means to an end that's not me? If money is a means to an end, what do you want your end to be? Stuff? Or do you want stories?
Okay, Buck, this is a significant day for quite a few different reasons. I don't know if you're aware of this. So, Josh, how long have you had your man bun? Since
I was 16, 17.
16 or 17.
Wow. Yeah, I think I was 16, 17 when I started growing it out.
So 8 or 9 years you've been known as like man bun Montoya.
Yep.
And it's gone.
Yep.
Because you lost a bet.
Yes.
A fantasy football bet.
Yes. Now, the caveat, though, is I've been ready to cut it for a while, but that was a big change to just go and, like, do just because.
Yeah.
Just make it happen. So I thought, if I make a bet out of it, this is a fun way. If I lose...
Yeah, you lost in 1 week, not a season, 1 week of fantasy football, which does kind of feel like you just wanted to cut it. Like it does feel like.
It's like you set yourself up for it. It's like you didn't want to, but if you put this, then you knew you were going to fail.
Well, what's funny, though, is going into the bet, I was like sure that I was going to win, because we made the bet between weeks 1 and week 2, and my team was the top scoring team in that fantasy football league.
Yeah.
And the lady that I was going against, hers was the worst. And something happened the next week after we made the bet. And literally it flipped. Like, I went from number 1, number 2 to like the very bottom. Yeah. And I was barely breaking 100 points week 3, and then she just curb stomped me on week 4. And it was like, the Lord knew.
Now you have a refreshed, amazing, spiked up,
almost buck hair
quality.
There's a little bit of a scary resemblance to
I for whatever reason, I'm so drawn to your hair, Josh.
The first day I was like looking at myself in the mirror, and I told myself out loud, because Molly wasn't home, she was out of town this weekend. I was like, man, I need to be careful, because if I style my hair the wrong way, I'm gonna be like mini Buck walking in.
I love it.
Walking
I'm a fan.
into Northpoint.
It's unbelievable. It's
Big
unbelievable.
fan.
Well, that's one reason. Second reason, historic win this week. I don't know, I loved it on ESPN. There's like, the lead at the bottom, and it just kept listing all of these reasons why this was like historic. Like, biggest win by Texas by like 50% more. It's 33 up to a 49-point win. Their first shutout in like 30 years or something like that, since OU hasn't scored a point. Just like one after the other of just completely demoralizing.
I saw a pretty funny stat yesterday that said Texas scored more points than OU had in passing yards.
Oh, wow. That's right, isn't it?
They had 39 passing yards, and we had 49 points.
See, we have to gloat in this moment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a while.
Well, they beat us 4 straight and 6 of the last 7.
Yeah.
So to like have this, we were watching with some friends. They're like, "Can we put on a TCU game?" We're like, "No, we're watching to the end of this game. We're soaking up like every
They also, their star receiver, who pretty much beat us last year, had 1 catch for -2 yards. Marvin Mims. One catch for negative 2 yards.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It's a good moment. We should celebrate that for sure. That's a
Their
good
decline
moment of
has been
celebration.
swift. It's wild. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, do you know what it is?
Your birthday.
Not my birthday.
Nope. I was thinking about that though.
I like the way you say birthday. Bert, it's like BIRTDAY.
It's more Bert.
Birthday.
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 It's birthday.
It is episode 100.
Yes.
Triple digits.
I know. It's
Can
hard
you
to
believe that?
No, it feels like, yeah. It feels like we've been doing it for a couple weeks.
Yeah. It brings back some weird nostalgic COVID memories that we probably don't need to reflect on. But to be like 300 of these conversations. I mean, I haven't been down for all of them, but you've been a part of most of them.
Yeah.
Quite a few of them. But anyways, our mastermind behind the whole overtime project is back in the mountains.
Jeremy.
Yeah, which is usually when I get to host when Jeremy's in the
I actually
mountains.
have an interesting question for you guys about episode 100. I don't
Yeah.
know. This is totally off the cuff, so we
Okay.
can cut it if it doesn't go well.
Okay.
Of all the podcasts y'all have been a part of, is there one that sticks out as like the best conversation or the most fun or whatever that we can tag in the description for people to go and watch?
The most fun ever?
Most fun, or like just the best conversation you feel like you were a part of, or most helpful?
Well, you know, one that stands out to me now is I, via Zoom, interviewed Jen Mazzola about like the Enneagram, and we
that was
introduced
early,
her.
too. That
Yeah,
was
we
way
introduced her as
early.
like Enneagram coach and all this kind of
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
So we're basically like meeting Jen, and now she's like part of the teaching team and on the stage, and has been on this podcast a whole bunch of times and all that. So it's kind of funny to think back to. For me, that was a good one. We've had Jeff Henderson on.
Yeah, I think Jeff Henderson, the leadership guy, was great. I think the most, kind of like in one I got, I was excited. Like, I'm excited for all of them, but the one I was like, oh man, I get to talk about something that typically I don't get to talk about was Tim Kennedy,
Right.
and UFC. Mm-hmm. So talking about UFC fighters and all that was like a lot of fun. And then I think the first one where Craig and Jen talking about like real, like hard, difficult things in life. That was number one.
Yeah.
And it was like, here's marriage, here's some things going on, and their vulnerability. And it was like, okay, here we go. We're starting this thing called Overtime where we're going to talk about, some real life stuff. So,
Yeah.
there's been lots of great moments. So many amazing guests and great combos.
I'd probably get in trouble if I didn't say favorite guest of all time is when you interviewed Emily. That happened.
Yes,
Early
you would.
counseling days.
That's really important. Yeah, and that, I'm glad you brought that. Was on the tip of my tongue, right on the
there.
tip of my mind,
It was
right
next.
there. That was
Yeah.
number. Yeah. So Emily, get a shout out.
Oh, that's good.
That's
All right,
by
that's a
the
good
way,
question,
if you don't
Josh.
know who Emily is, that's Jordan's wife. In
That-
case you're
that's-
listening or
that's-
watching, and you're
that's
like,
fair.
Who's Emily?
Tend to assume
it's
people
Jordan's
know all
wife.
the things.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we're going to talk about something unrelated to all of those things. And that is, we just kicked off a brand new series called
yeah.
Money See Money Do.
Why not?
With this whole context of if we were to see our stuff, see our money, our finances, our possessions the way Jesus did, what would that change? What would that change about what we do, our perspective, our heart, our actions, and so on? Which I really love. Like even in the title, it's a series that can be emotional. It's a series, based on our experiences, our church experiences, where we're at, that maybe we don't want to lean into the conversation. And so to just say like, hey, let's, the way you phrased it, I love, not the way Northpoint would or the way Buck would, but the way that Jesus would view money. Let's have a conversation about that for a couple weeks because it's relevant in every single one of our lives. So I love part one. I love where we're going in the series. And you specifically connected heaven and money in part one, which to me, I love because we've a couple times on these podcasts I love talking about heaven, but to somebody who's like, that's an odd connection.
Yeah.
Like how did the two intertwine? Why did you pull that into part one with that perspective? How would you say, well, I should ask you about heaven first. Maybe that's a better order.
Well, I just think just to comment on that, like you were like, hey, we're going to look at not how Buck, not how Northpoint, but how Jesus. And then you were like, you then pulled into heaven. And I was like, no.
Jesus pulled in heaven.
Yeah. So I would just, as a point of like just context and clarity, it's, one of the things I did say in part one, it's like, man, how much Jesus talked about money. And then I challenge people in about midway through the message, just saying, hey, how much Jesus talked about reward in heaven? And so what I find interesting, if you just follow Jesus, just go after him, just keep your eyes focused on him and look at what he said and look at how he said it, look at the context, and it's amazing how many times he connected so many other aspects to heaven, but how he also connected money to heaven. He constantly connected these two dots, and you're like, wow. So just as a point of clarification, I would love to take credit for things, but that one
You're telling me Jesus did it first.
I just can't take credit for it.
Okay, so let's start there, and then we'll connect the two, because heaven is a very ambiguous word to many of us. Clouds, harps, halos. What does it look like? So, no big deal. Just summarize it in a couple minutes. What can we expect? What's it like? What's it not like?
Yeah. So I would just go back to our resources I talked about on Sunday. If you weren't there Sunday, it's a book called Heaven by Randy Alcorn. It's a large book. I know you've read it, Jordan. I'd highly recommend that book. It's a lot to get through. You got to persevere, but if you get through it, potentially it could be one of those life-changing kind of books. It's like, man, here are 5 books I've read in my life that really shaped the direction of my life. It could be one of those kind of books. It is so insightful and so paradigm shifting, and probably breaks down so many kind of these historic religious walls if you've grown up in church, to go like, man, I just never knew that. I was never taught that. And almost can make you feel like a little bit like, why? Like I should have been taught that. It's so helpful. It's so motivating to understand and get clarity on heaven, especially how much the Bible talks about it. So that would be one resource. The other resource is by Randy Alcorn as well. It's called The Law of Rewards, and just about how much Jesus connects our behavior and what we do with our possessions, what we do with our attitudes and our actions, and heaven and rewards. So Randy goes and talks about that. It's a great book. As I think you read it this week, and you said short read. So
yeah, it's quick. It's much quicker than heaven.
Yeah. And great resources. Start with that. The third resource is again by Randy. You can go on his website. It's Eternal Perspective Ministries. It's called epm.org. Again, epm.org. So I only share those resources because we're going to talk about it probably like at a 30,000 foot view, at a 50,000 foot view, but there's so many nuances, there's so many questions, there's so many just, little kind of rooms you can go in terms of understanding heaven. So those will help you go much, much further. But in terms of heaven, I would just say, we start with Jesus. So in John 14, Jesus having a conversation with his guys. And so there's James and John and Matthew, the guys are all there. And they're talking to him about, eternity, about the Father, all this kind of stuff. And Jesus turns to them and he says these words: "There are many rooms in my Father's home, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am." So in terms of your eternity, your eternal destiny is heaven. But the other picture he paints is not the harps and halos and music forever. He paints like this actual physical place with physical rooms, and that there's real property and almost like, a city, almost like this idea to go and be explored. Like he continues to drop these hints of heaven being real and physical and tangible. And so I wanted to start with that, because I think it's really important to understand, like Jesus talks about it all the time. So I would really encourage people to go there. But then I also want to kind of give some perspective in terms of just a kind of a summary statement Randy gives. And this begins like, what is heaven like? So again, at a 30,000 foot view, he says, Randy invites you to picture heaven the way Scripture describes it: a bright, vibrant, and physical new earth. And I love that picture. So what you think about earth, it's like just move to a new earth, and it's the adventure, it's the fun, free from sin, suffering, and death, he says, and brimming with Christ's presence, wondrous, natural beauty. So if you love the outdoors, like Jeremy's in the mountains, it's like that kind of natural beauty, and the richness of human culture as God intended. So this diversity, this beauty, this richness of culture is going to be what heaven will be like. And if you took straight from the Bible, so I went straight from the Bible and said, if I just took verses and I said, what are some data points? So if we just said, here's some data points about heaven. And, again, these can be found in Randy's resources, but from heaven, and these are directly from verses, it's a dwelling place of God and angels, A data point of heaven is places where saints have gone who died. That's followers of Jesus go when they die. Heaven is a real physical place, so it's not some spiritual, like we're all floating in the spirit. It's a real physical place. Heaven is described as a city. In heaven, there's no decay in heaven, so we're not worried about like rusting things or, how things, will over time decay. A place of great joy and pleasure. Heaven is a place we get to be with Christ, so the idea to be reunited with Christ in his physical presence. We get to see loved ones and experience relationships. So if you love relationships, if you love camaraderie, if you love connecting in those really kind of sacred, intimate relational spaces, that's there. In heaven, there's a temple that we are going to be able to worship God. In heaven, there's many rooms, as Jesus describes, dwelling places. In heaven, we're going to be capable of walking, talking, and physical touch. In heaven, the Bible describes eating and drinking in heaven. In heaven, again, describing worshiping, singing music together, being in the very presence of God, being overwhelmed by his beauty and his holiness. In heaven, we will be able to think, imagine, and feel. In heaven, we'll be able to kind of dream and think about future. In heaven, we'll have rewards and possessions. So like real tangible rewards and possessions that impact our experience in heaven. In heaven, it'll be refreshing and restful, and there will be work. So like when you're working and you come home from work and you're like, that was a great day of work. Like I felt like I was aligned with my purpose and meaning. Man, that was like almost restful. That's the kind of work, but there will be work in heaven. There's going to be streets, places, cities, trees, streams, water, lights, and fruits according to the scriptures, animals in heaven, and we will eat and drink in heaven, which I'm very excited about that as well, because there's lots of like those jokes that go, man, I wonder if there's like Krispy Kreme in heaven and that they're not bad. Like the Bible paints the picture. We're going to sit here, we're going to eat and drink and talk and have fun and have this connection, and that's heaven. And if I was to, another summary statement just to kind of button that up, and then I'd be curious if you have anything to add here, Jordan, is heaven is in the presence of God with people with real bodies enjoying close relationships with God and each other, eating, drinking, working, playing, traveling, worshiping, and discovering on a new earth. Earth as God created it, earth as he intended it to be. That is heaven.
Yeah, I related with even what you said up front, the shocking as you hear some of this, like and the why, like the asking the question why. Like I think I described it as there was this like almost a stream of anger or something. It was like why did I not, or why did I have such a radically different perception, or why and it's almost like something switched to where when I would picture heaven, it was like. It was like cloudy. I don't even mean like there are clouds. I mean, it was like loose. It was like dreaming. It was like whatever. And this is real and reality, and Buck's right there and I can touch you. And now they've almost like flipped in my head. They're like, that's as real as it gets. Like heaven is our ultimate reality. And not that this isn't real, but it's like everything is more alive, more clear, more engaged, more, and so I think the phrase from that book that has always stuck with me is the phrase of redemptive continuity. And it's not just like a big, theology
very
phrase.
common phrase everybody throws around.
Yeah, it's like everything is being redeemed, right? Like everything that's touched by sin is being redeemed and restored. So it's a little bit of an oversimplification because there's a few exceptions, but it's almost like if it's not inherently sinful here, it will continue into the next life even better, redeemed, restored, renewed.
Right.
And it's kind of an easy way to think about it. Like, will there be animals? Yes. Will there be food? Yes. But the best food you've ever had, will there be mountains and beaches and, so all of those kinds of things, relationships, but no drama and no distrust and no anger and no hurt, So the continuation piece kind of answers, you can almost answer a lot of questions for yourself that way about what will heaven be like. And we can't imagine pieces of it. So, I don't know if that might have been longer than 5 minutes, but
no, that was well, and I think that's really, I love that. I think it simplifies it, that redemptive continuity statement, to just go like, hey, this is where that's where that statement comes. Picture everything you love about earth, but just redeemed, better, clear,
right.
The way God intended it to be, absent of judgment and sin, that is heaven to come.
Right. So I'm ready for it. I'm excited about it.
Right. Well, don't get too excited. Well, yeah.
But ultimately, we're not in a heaven series. We have done that before. If anybody's more curious, there is content on our site to go back through that. But we're connecting that now with heaven and our stuff in this life. So now I'll ask you, why did Jesus, I can say why did Jesus, or why did you point out that Jesus did, connect the two?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like, it's like talking about Jordan without talking about, UT, or talking about Jordan without talking about your brother Jeremy that is taller than you now. And, it's like, you just can't talk about the things without like what's true of you and then what's true of Jesus. So this is one of the things where I'd really encourage people, and if you're watching or listening, really just to go back and look at what Jesus said about so many aspects of eternity, heaven, rewards, and our actions today. So I think like Matthew 6, just read the whole chapter. It's just amazing. Matthew 25, another great chapter to read just to look at what Jesus said. Just a couple examples of this. It's like Jesus is talking about, giving in Matthew chapter 6. And he says, in terms of like giving to the needy. And he says, but when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. So this idea to go, hey, if you give before men, and you're like, hey, look at what I did and how generous I was and how I helped these people or my neighbors or friends. Like, look at. Like, Jesus is like, well, you're going to get your reward. It's just going to be here. But if you do it because I have served you, and you're like, this is what God called me to do, and for your neighbor, for your friend, you just go do what God calls you to do without going public with it. He says, then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Again, painting this picture of your Heavenly Father one day, someday to come. Same thing with like spiritual disciplines, like fasting. He continues, he says, like when you fast, and it's like, some people do it like, look at all, I've read the Bible and I memorized all these scriptures. Look at me, look at me, look at me. And then there's some who do it for what God called us to do it, to just do it because we want to grow in our intimacy, our connection, our closeness with God. And when those things are done, when you're like, man, I've been persevering, all these spiritual disciplines, whatever they may be, Jesus says, he goes, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So this theme of rewards is everywhere, and connecting it to heaven. And then he continues and he goes on to this idea of money. So now he transitions, and when he talks about money, he says, do not store for yourself up treasure on earth. Now, again, it's like, okay, Jesus, I'm trying to get away from this concept of rewards, of heaven and money, but I can't get away from it because if I stick with you, you keep connecting the dots. And so he says, do not store for yourself up treasure on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. In other words, that's your temptation. We want to store up things because that's what we think. It's real, it's seen, it's here. We want to build our kingdoms here. He says, don't do that, but store up for yourself treasure in heaven. Here he goes. Where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Then you're like, what are you talking about? Then he ends, you cannot serve both God and money. You got to pick. They're mutually exclusive. So he connects money, and he connects money to heaven. He connects money to reward. He connects money to eternity. And he connects money to our heart. And what I wrote down here, I said, but what we do with our money doesn't simply indicate where our heart is, or it's an indicator to where our heart is. According to Jesus, it determined where our heart goes. So like this idea that we can actually lead our heart, open the door of our heart with our money, he paints that picture. But in terms of what money, he also paints the picture. He connects it to treasure in heaven. And he says, what you're doing with your money not only leads your heart, but that's one of the ways you send it on ahead. It's like an investment. So you're sending this ahead, treasure in heaven, and he continues to paint the picture over and over. So, again, if you just stick with Jesus, if you go with him and what he says, what we looked at, Luke 16 on Sunday, I mean, you just couldn't get away from it over and over. He keeps talking about like, hey, here's property here. If you've been trustworthy, I'll trust you with true riches again in heaven. The whole context of what he's talking about is what we're doing with our money. And you're like, wow, okay. So that's where the connection comes from. That's where, you can't get away with Jesus, money, heaven, rewards. They're all connected.
Well, when I'm listening to you, I feel like you've taken it to like its logical conclusion of what most people are already doing. Like if you've ever, saved for anything, like if you've ever wanted to like buy a car, buy a house. If you just wanted to buy an Apple Watch, if you've I'm going to use my money for something in the future. There's something I desire with it, especially if you're investing or retirement planning or anything. There's this I know what I want to do with my money in the future. Well, why would you not just take that to its logical conclusion and say well, eternity is in terms of the percentage of the pie, it's the 99.99%. So let's have that conversation about how does it impact eternity. And that's I see what this conversation, I think why this series is really special is because when you start to look at how does Jesus see money, that's why he's always constantly tying in, let's keep the big picture in mind.
Well, especially if he's for us. If you think Jesus came from heaven, he came to give his life for us because we're valuable and we have worth in his eyes, then he goes to heaven. And so naturally, if you've been somewhere and you're for somebody and you want to prepare them for where they're going and you love them, you're going to talk about it all the time, especially if it's a really, really big deal. Yep. And that's what Jesus does. And without Jesus painting the picture of eternity and heaven and what's to come, and that you can actually store up treasure, you can actually send things ahead. You can't bring anything with you. You can send things ahead. Without that picture, then this conversation makes no sense. It's like I said on Sunday, it's 0 sense. It's a little bit Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
But since Jesus paints that picture and then he gives his life for us and says, I'm for you and what I'm telling you is true, then that does bring this into the kind of logical conclusion to what you just said, to go okay, and let's think about it. Let's invest in that.
Yeah. The subtitle of the law of rewards is giving what you can't keep to gain what you can't lose, right? And he makes the argument, no matter what you accumulate here, you're leaving it all behind. But there is something that you can gain in the next life that you'll never lose based on how we use our finances. So
100%.
Unpack that a little bit then. We talk about rewards in heaven. Starts to get maybe a little funny for people based on especially how familiar they are with some of these conversations. But what does that mean or look like based on how Jesus described it?
Yeah, so here's where I would get, I would just preface this real quickly. If you're not a follower of Jesus, or if you have a lot of questions about Jesus and you're watching and listening, I understand hearing this stuff feels like Twilight Zone. It really does. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And I equally think it's important to acknowledge if you are a follower of Jesus, you've trusted him with your sin, you've trusted him with your sorrows, you've trusted him with your family, your kids, if you've got kids, your future, you've trusted him so many moments, God, please help, God, please intervene, God, please help me, not that, whatever it is, and you've trusted him with your eternity. So this idea to trust him with your money and trust him with this concept of rewards is, again, it falls very much in that context. It's the area we have the hardest time trusting him. But if we're going to trust him with all those other areas, we should also trust him when it comes to our money and this concept of rewards. And so when it comes to rewards, I would just say, a couple things to think about. Hebrews 9 says it's appointed for a man to die once, but after that face judgment. Without going into a judgment conversation, which is always a fun conversation on a podcast. There will be a time that, we are appointed to die whenever our time's up. We will face judgment. There's a judgment seat of Christ, which is a second judgment. And that judgment seat of Christ is where, the picture that Paul paints many times is that's where everything will be laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. And there's going to be wood, hay, and straw. In other words, here's the things you did for yourself, or here's the things that were very selfish, or here's all the motives that are going to be judged. Even things you did for religious reasons or church reasons or Jesus reasons, as we may say. Those are going to be exposed for what they are. And then there's going to be things like Jesus with painting. Hey, things you did in private, things you did because you were prompted to do because of God, things you did because out of obedience. Like everything will be laid bare, and it will be wood, hay, or straw, or gold, silver, and precious stones. This concept of judgment and this concept of rewards as a result of what we have done with what we had. Paul commands, and when it comes to money, he takes Jesus' teachings in 1 Timothy 6. And I love what he says. He says, command those. So he's talking to young Timothy, a pastor of a church. So he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. That's talking about heaven, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Like there's a life to come. That's true life. That's the 99.9%. So Paul, again, is here talking about this treasure where Jesus said in Matthew 6, this treasure, this reward in heaven. So to put that together, what I'd like to do is just read a section from Randy's book and say, let's kind of synthesize those verses and a little bit of that context and begin to answer the question, so what about rewards? Like tangibly, what does this mean? So he says this. He says, according to the Bible, rewards for many things, including doing good works, denying ourselves, showing compassion to the needy, and treating our enemies kindly, as well as what we do with our money, is all has implications. Then he goes on and he says, he also grants us rewards for sacrificial and generous giving. Go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, Jesus says. God promises rewards to those who endure difficult circumstances while trusting him, to those who live faithfully and with good motives, to those who persevere under persecution. God will richly reward a life of godliness. God will also reward those who make wise and productive use of the resources and opportunities he has given them. So in other words, he paints this picture. Everything we're doing in life, God sees and will reward. Everything will be laid bare at the judgment seat of Christ. And then in terms of rewards, no matter how we attempt to explain it, no matter how uneasy it makes us, it's a fact that the biblical doctrine of differing rewards and differing positions in heaven means we will have different experiences in heaven. So as I said on Sunday, rewards is not if you get into heaven, rewards is the experience in heaven. So if there's property, if there's cities, if there's places to go, if there's places to experience, if there's authority and leadership, if work is like enjoyable kind of work, what kind of work will you be able to do? If there's experiences maybe you will be able to do and not be able to do, that's where I said on Sunday, I can't fully explain that. So I can't fully dive into like, oh my gosh, you're going to be able to get level 3 seating in the stadium to watch. I mean, that's so speculative. But it does paint a picture of experiences and what the experience will be like as a result of what you did with your money, with your time, with your talents, with, you know, how you treated people, how you persevered, your faithfulness, all of that in terms of the experience and the rewards you'll be given, the wood, or not, you don't want the wood. You actually want the gold, silver, and precious stones, that those will be used for the experience and what you'll get to do in terms of the world to come, the redemptive continuity, all the things, the beaches, the mountains, you know, the travel. I mean, that's going to be a whole nother wild concept of time travel, of time, you know, is different in heaven than it is here. You know, we'll be able to go places and things. And so what are the implications? Perhaps that will be what you get to do and don't get to do based upon what you did do with the time and the resources you had here in this world.
Yeah, I love that distinction you made. And right in his book, he says, the Bible shows that while our faith determines our eternal destination, our behavior, including what we do with our money, determines our eternal rewards. And it's one of those, like, not all these topics are created equal, right? Like, this has implications for every area of our life, and it's so commonly missed. It's so commonly misunderstood. And I like, you know, what you said, that obviously if you're exploring faith right now, it does feel like this is kind of a Twilight Zone conversation. But for followers of Christ, there's just so many that this is not their perception of what's to come, the implications of their actions. It's wild.
Yeah, and these are like in Luke 16, what I talked about on Sunday. The statements where you've been faithful with little, now you'll be faithful with much. Now there's light upon that statement to go, oh, so you're talking about if a world to come, redemptive continuity, and we look at scriptures and like, that world to come, this is a terrible illustration, but I think it serves a little bit of a purpose. Like, you go into Disneyland and you can experience Disneyland at certain levels depending on what kind of access pass you have. And so it doesn't do it justice, so don't take this illustration too far. But the access pass we get when we go to heaven, experientially, not if we get into heaven, has so much to do with what we do with our time and possessions and behavior and attitude and how we love and serve people. And so without getting into the weeds of going like, you know, then you'll be able to upgrade your meal and you'll have steak versus, you know, just a bunch of like whatever, spaghetti, or maybe you like spaghetti more, but like that's just stuff I don't know. I don't know on that, but
it makes me think of, you know, like at boot camp every year we'll do a Q&A where students get to submit, you know, questions, and there's hundreds of them. And one of the questions that's posed every year is, you know, hey, if I'm going to heaven, like, why does it matter what I do here? Like if I place my trust in Jesus,
Yeah.
and there's lots of answers. There's lots of good answers. This isn't
Sure.
the only one, but this would be one of the major ones to be, oh my goodness. Like
Well,
everything you do has implications.
Yeah, and without that kind of clarity, it creates confusion.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest gifts we can give is clarity. And so we can give clarity until we can't. And that's why I want to be very careful to not give clarity where the Bible doesn't give clarity or Jesus doesn't give clarity. We get clarity. Rewards are in heaven. Yes. Rewards impact experiences. Yes. How?
Yeah.
That's where the clarity begins to go. I don't know. We can speculate here, but I do think that gift of clarity with the students, a gift of clarity with anyone listening, or does begin that motivation. And the Bible does describe being motivated by rewards.
Yes.
It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Like we should be motivated. Like, hey, okay, I'm going to take the dollars over here and not build my kingdom here. I'm going to, absolutely provide for my family. I'm called to do that. But at the same time, I'm going to take those and invest those in the kingdom to come, in the world to come. Well, I'm going to do that motivated by what Christ has done for me centrally, but also motivated by rewards that here's the promises of Jesus. Jesus, I'm going to hold you to those promises.
Yep. I think that was one of the most freeing parts, just like personally for me and reading this. I think the Heaven book similarly, but definitely the Law of Rewards is there's a lot in the category that is sin that is really a misplaced desire. It's like a God-given desire that we distort, that we use in the wrong area. We miss the mark. We miss like what his intentions were for it. And I think about that. I'm like, man, it's in me to want stuff. It's in me to want to accumulate. It's in me to want to be rewarded, for my work. And there is a good, healthy place to go with that. Like to in the eyes of our Father, to seek, reward from him, to seek praise from him, not praise of man. I was just reading John this week about, that kind of thing. Like if it's desiring the reward from people, well, you get that now and you get that in this life and that's all you get. Great. Versus there is this transcendent desire that's absolutely good to, achieve and desire and to be seen by him. So,
right. And that's where it comes where Jesus says, don't store it for your self-treasure on earth, which the point is that thing in you that wants to build, that thing in me that wants to build and store up and, create and buy a second house, third house, fourth house, fifth house, sixth house, all that kind of stuff. Like keep going, go, go, go. Like, build all these comforts. That is not bad.
Yeah.
It's just misplaced.
Right.
And so if that's in us, we should pay attention to it and go, Jesus, why is that in us?
Yeah.
And is there a reason you've put that in us? And is there a bigger reason than maybe I can see today?
Yep.
And Jesus elevates our perspective. And that's one of the things he came to give us is clarity to go, hey, there's a world to come. Like that thing in you is really good, but build it, invest it in the world to come, not here, because you just can't take it with you.
Yeah.
That would be a loving father would do that.
Right.
And that's what Jesus does for us.
I love it. So why then do you think it's so easy for us to lose sight of this? Why does money become a means again, or why does it become an end again instead of just a means? How do we keep some of these concepts front and center?
Well, I think I can touch it. This is my reality today and not my reality tomorrow. So my reality tomorrow is something that I have to take on trust. Faith is I'm trusting, I have confidence that what you say is to come. And that's the reality tomorrow. So I think that tension for me is what makes it difficult. That, hey, if I buy this, it does give me some security. Hey, if I look at my bank account and it has this number in it, it provides some stability and security. And I'm not saying like you should look at your bank account at zero because you gave it all away. Now, again, I would invite God in that conversation because I'm not here to say you should or should not do that. But like instead of doing that, which I think is the whole idea that it's tangible, we can see it, we can touch it, we can feel it today. That's what makes it very, very difficult. We have to take Jesus, again, that we've trusted our sin, we've trusted our sorrows, we've trusted our eternity to him, our entire eternity. Then we also should trust in terms of the world to come and our possessions and our stuff. And that tension that's it right there. And it's like, will you trust him now with your possessions? Are you going to put your security and your passions in your stuff? Or are you going to put your security and your passions in me? You've trusted me in these other areas. I'm asking you to trust me in all areas. That's the tension. And in the world to come, when our time is up and then we face judgment, that's the day, we expect to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, because I trusted you with the world to come.
I think on a very practical, the Law of Rewards is, I think it's like just over 100 pages. It's like, I think the Audible is maybe 3 hours. So if you were about to make like a significant financial decision, you decide what significant is for you. I don't know if that's $1,000, $10,000, whatever. You could like listen to this sped up and a commute to work and back.
Yes.
And if you did that right before you made the decision,
right,
I would bet most of us make a different decision than we're about to make. Like
Yeah.
it's so like it's convicting in the best way. It's like it's more motivating for. I think it's less like, oh, I feel bad now, I can't. It's just like I'm inspired to use my money differently than I desired to an hour and a half beforehand before I considered it.
Right.
Jesus's way.
I think that potentially is the takeaway from the podcast.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And I hope if you're watching or listening, what you're hearing is not listen to Jordan, listen to Buck, listen to Northpoint. What you'll do in that hour and a half, if you listen on 2-speed, or 2 times sped up, you'll get a clarity around Jesus. Like all Randy does is let's just look at Jesus and let's look at what he says and let's look at what he inspired. Let's look at Jesus. And if you take an hour and a half of your life before you make a major financial decision, which will have implications in your life here and your life to come, why not just get clarity on Jesus, who is for you, who loves you, and who can help you make a better decision?
100%. Well, if we are going to start seeing money as a means and no longer the end, what does that look like in our life? / maybe point us to next week.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about this upcoming week. So in part 2, I will actually answer that question. So I really want you guys to tune in, watch however you do it, or come in person. And part 2, we're just going to talk about, okay, now that we have this picture, what are the implications? What can we do practically in our lives to begin to kind of reorient our lives around what Jesus said to orient our lives, and so that we can experience what Jesus invited us to experience? And we're going to talk about that at a very practical level in part 2.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for you, leading into these conversations, because you're putting yourself out there a little bit. You're going to be met by people's emotions and reactions and, all that. But to me, I'm like, it's impossible not to read the scriptures and be like, this is the most like loving way to have real conversations around this. And the way you've unpacked it already so far, I'm really excited for where we're going. So,
yep. Hopefully helpful. And I'll just remind, with that said, is that, my job as a pastor is to inspire people to follow Jesus. And that if we can do that, if I can lead people to that and not lead people to, stages and tall hair and, all that kind of stuff, that's the win for our church, to inspire people to follow Jesus. So that's what we're doing.
You should have told Josh that before you cut it down like yours.
That's right. All right, man. Thank you.
So close.